Do you remember earlier this year when I did that whole post-tech show where I tried to do the common NASCAR influencer thing where you just essentially talk about things that every NASCAR journalist has already said like 4 days prior? Well, if you don't remember, it was about as boring as you'd expect. That's why today I'm doing something completely different, an unscripted, except for this intro, video featuring both my analysis and takeaways about the NASCAR Cup Series drivers and teams, as well as my personal opinions on drivers. There's probably going to be something that I'm going to miss, since this is just my takeaways from memory. But I've been asked before about my opinions on drivers. This is an effective way of talking about both the driver's statistical performance, which is the facts, but also how I perceive them, which is the opinion. I'll be going in reverse numerical order, so number 99 to number 1, and that's a Trackhouse bookend regardless of which direction you go. One note about how I'm doing this is that I'm only going to talk about the chartered organizations, since they're the only full-time ones nowadays anyway, and I'm focusing on drivers that ran majority of the schedule. So people like Kligerman and Rockefeller, who ran a very limited schedule, won't be analyzed. Anyways, this is the 2022 NASCAR Cup Series Field Review. And obviously we get to start with the 99 team of Daniel Suarez, Trackhouse Racing, their second year as an organization. Even though the 99 team was kind of outshined the whole year when it comes to, media presence for the most part by the one of Chastain, Daniel Suarez had a great season. Breaking into victory lane for the first time at Sonoma really solidified the fact that that team's season was a success. They were also pretty competitive towards the latter part of the season. Parts failure at the Roval knocked them out of further playoff contention. And on the opinion side of things, I've always enjoyed Daniel Suarez. I mean, come on. The man took Starcom Speed Station's 00 car to a championship. What more do I even need to say? The second team to talk about jumps us all the way from number 99 to number 78, BJ and friends at Live Fast Motorsports. This team, along with Rick Ware Racing, are the perfect examples of teams only there for charter money. But that's what they're supposed to do under this system. I mean, I can't blame them at all. A team like Live Fast Motorsports, if it was 2010, would be right up there with Nemco Motorsports and Prism Motorsports, but the charter model has kind of changed the business model enough to where you almost have these zombie teams running around at the back of the field where very well there's not ever going to be any improvement. I do enjoy the lower budget race teams, so there's nothing I'm saying that's against the 78. In fact, don't blame the players or the team, blame the game for allowing this type of crap to happen. Overall, the 78 team does hardly anything over the course of a year. They finished 36th in car owner points. That's dead last of the chartered organizations. McLeod himself, though, is at least an entertaining driver, and I respect him for roughing it out as many years as he has with low-budget race organizations and doing what they have to do to make and run these races. Next up, 77 car at Spire Motorsports. They give me almost the same exact subject matter as the 78 team did. They were another all-star car just like the 78. But hey, at least because of how stupid the second Daytona race was with the rain big one, almost every single one of these very, very low-budget charter teams got a good day. The weirdest thing, at least to me, about the 77 team is the discrepancy between that 77 car and the 7 within Spire Motorsports. Now, even knowing that when it comes to their overall points position, there's not a huge difference, but in performance on track, the 7 was always at least like 6 spots ahead of the 77 over the course of the year. Overall opinions of the drivers, and I'm just going to talk about their two main drivers that they had, Landon Castle and Josh Bilicki. I enjoy Bilicki. Okay, that Mock Series Daytona 500 win solidified that. And Landon Castle's one of those guys who's roughed it out over the course of the last 15 years to try to really establish himself with a presence in NASCAR's national divisions. And just that alone really makes him likable. But anyway, next team that we get to talk about is the 51 car of Cody Ware, Rick Ware Racing. This was another team that benefited from the miracle race at Daytona in August to score a top 10 finish. Almost actually won if the two Rick Ware cars could have got their act together on the last couple laps. Unfortunately, Cody was one of the victims of the next-gen car's safety issues with that very, very bad wreck at Texas. And we're all glad that he was able to return to competition afterwards. But overall, this is another team that's more or less just there. They rough it out towards the back of all the chartered organizations, which means they don't really give me much material to work with. And I'll be honest, driver opinions opinions of Cody Ware, I don't have much to say positive or negative. Above all else, I just feel bad for him being victimized by the next-gen car. The next team is the 48 car of Alex Bowman. Now, in one of my early year post-tech editions, I talked about how infrequently he leads in the races that he wins. But unfortunately, since that video, he's been shut out of victory lane. But more importantly, he was yet another driver who was the victim of a next-gen crash. In Bowman's case, it was a concussion that took him out of a handful of races, which ultimately derailed his season. That race team, of course, has a lot of potential. I mean, it's a Hendrick car. They just need the right brakes to open up for them. You know, next year, with Greg Ives stepping down, he's going to get Blake Harris. Alex Bowman is as his crew chief. If those two can really get together and find some good chemistry, that 48 team could be absolutely bad fast next year. Opinions on Alex Bowman, honestly, when it comes to all the Hendrick drivers, I probably enjoy him the most just because of what he had to go through to get up to this level. I mean, I remember watching him at RAB Racing, a team that was probably most famous for fielding Kenny Wallace. But seeing Bowman's progression, being able to get opportunities with JRM and Hendrick, seeing a driver like his getting rewarded with good opportunities is cool to see. So out of the Hendrick drivers, when it comes to personality and how much favoritism I show towards them, I probably enjoy Bowman the most. Next car is the 47 of Ricky Stenhouse Jr. And I'm telling you, this race team, JTG Daugherty, has benefited massively from two things. One, the next-gen car kind of acting as an equalizer for a lot of these race teams. But two is the fact that they've downsized to a one-car organization. They consolidated all their efforts on one car, and it has showed. Even knowing that race team definitely did fall off towards the latter half of the season, they had a really solid first half. They even went on a tear of getting 4 consecutive top 10s, including a runner-up finish at Dover. My opinions of Stenhouse as a driver, he's definitely a fun one to watch, especially when you're watching him at a plate track. You think he's going to create the next big meme. Next up is the 45 team. It honestly started out pretty amazing. I mean, you know, Kurt Busch win at Kansas, that was fantastic. But then, you know, Kurt had that horrible wreck at Pocono that he's still not 100% from. Then the team kind of had another high point with Bubba Wallace winning in the 45 at Kansas again, but then a very low point at Las Vegas. To fixate on the driver perspective of this, I'm just going to talk about Kurt Busch because he was the one who was at least supposed to drive the 45 all year. Unfortunately, wasn't able to, but always enjoyed watching Kurt, at least for the last 7-8 years. Since he's mellowed down, became a lot more professional. He went from being one of the most hated drivers to being one of the most loved, at least of the last few years. You might notice a bit of a change in look, okay? I got so far onto my soapbox with the whole Kurt Busch thing that I forgot completely to talk about Ty Gibbs. But anyway, for being a very short-notice substitute Cup Series driver, you know, with no experience in a Cup car beforehand, honestly, Ty did a very great job as a substitute for Kurt Busch. Other than that stupid, dumb pit road run-in at Texas Motor Speedway, I would say his season went very solid for his first experience in a Cup car. Opinion-wise, when it comes to Ty Gibbs, he kind of goes back and forth on my scale between being don't care and annoying. You see, Ty has a unique ability, and I've never seen this from any other driver, but some weekends he'll go out, at least during his Xfinity season, and you'll think that driver should probably still be in ARCA. But then some weekends, he would go out and you think that man deserves a Cup ride this instant. For example, you know, the big run-ins that he's had this season, especially at Martinsville in both the spring and the fall in the Xfinity Series, those were ARCA driver style moments, but then going up there outright beating Kyle Larson at Road America and putting on a dominating performance to win the championship race at Phoenix in the Xfinity Series, those moments are Cup Series driver moments. So for me personally, it's hard to get a read on Ty Gibbs, although I do have to say he is an incredible talent. I mean, he is taking advantage of every opportunity he's getting. Next up, Eric Jones at Petty GMS. Ever since Auto Club has absolutely destroyed my expectations of what that team was going to be able to accomplish this year. I mean, they have really, really found something. The combination of Jones and Dave Ellens has worked to perfection, and obviously that culminated with winning the Southern 500. When it comes to opinions on Eric Jones, I would say that before this year, I didn't really even have that much of an opinion for him. I mean, I felt bad for him getting shoved out of Joe Gibbs like a lot of development drivers have over the years. But over the course of this year, I think he's become kind of a natural fan favorite by him and that whole organization bringing the 43 car back up to a competitive race car is just a really, really big deal and a great thing to see. Then you have the other side of the story. The 42 car at Petty GMS has struggled. I mean, struggled bad the whole year. Ty Dillon only scored 1 top 10 this year, and that was at the Bristol Dirt Race where he finished 10th. My opinions on Ty Dillon? I mean, I don't have any opinions, positive or negative. Ty Dillon, I think, would have a much better time in a lower division. Whether that be Xfinity, Truck, I don't really care. Go win another ARCA championship. Whatever gets you out of 29th place in Cup just personally sounds funner. I don't know if the money is like really that good in Cup, but I don't know. Driving that 42 car doesn't look fun from the outside. And God forbid the 77. And the next car, 41 Stewart-Haas Racing, Cole Custer. This whole race team is still competing well underneath the expectation that everybody had when Cole Custer moved up to Cup. Because, I mean, he tore up Xfinity so much. All of us back then thought that where Custer is going to be in 2022 is where, Christopher Bell is right now. Is, running for Cup championships. For a moment, it looked like that's the way it was going. That Kentucky win kind of made it look that direction. But since then, it has been pretty much downhill for this whole 41 team. Anyways, opinions on the driver. Another one that I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. I do have to admit that I think I forgot he existed about 3 times over the course of the year. But overall, that 41 car is in a very unique position on track. Not far enough up front for the cameras to catch him. Not far enough in the back to be caught while being lapped. When you're right in the middle, about 25th, that's the dead zone for appearing on screen. Next up, 38 car Todd Gilliland. I will be honest with you when I say that this team has exceeded my expectations. Actually, quite a bit. I mean, they didn't do very good, but they did so much better than I expected because I figured, okay, Front Row Motorsports, we get that Todd Gilliland's like capable of a truck win every year, but that doesn't mean throw him in a Cup car, especially one where you got to have significant talent to make a Cup car of that quality run somewhat towards the front. That was the 38 car's 3rd consecutive year with a rookie. John Hunter Nemechek, Anthony Alfredo, Todd Gilliland. They've had 3 years contending for the Rookie of the Year award. So I figured this is just going to be revolving door, just like, the last 2 rookies going to get chewed up and spit out. I mean, I'll be honest, I entered the season expecting him to never really finish higher than 28th. So just the fact that he busted off some good top 20s is way better than I anticipated for a driver that was 10th place quality Truck Series competitor. I'm not even sure if I have an opinion on Todd Gilliland either. Next up, 34 team, Michael Mcdowell. Daytona 500 winner, Michael Mcdowell, driving for NASCAR championship winning team, Front Row Motorsports. I mean, the fact that I can even say that is a victory. That race team had an absolutely outstanding season. Let me put it this way. Michael Mcdowell has 28 career top 10s. He got 12 of them this season. Granted, they're losing their crew chief off to Hendrick Motorsports, which is a great move by Hendrick to get Blake Harris. But still, the performance that Michael Mcdowell has had this season and that whole race team has been very outstanding. Opinions on Michael Mcdowell? There's nothing really not to like about him. I mean, the man struggled for so many years driving for teams like Prism Motorsports that seeing him get these opportunities to succeed, win the Daytona 500, having a car that can bust off top 10s on a regular basis, it's just really cool to see. Next car, number 31, Justin Haley. Justin is a quietly solid driver. I mean, he puts in good performances and doesn't wreck things very often. And I think for a driver like Justin to get his first full-time season with one organization, I think for him to get a 22nd place finish in point standings and to bust off 3 top 5s, he did exactly what that team needed him to do. As a new organization in Cup, he didn't wreck a bunch of their cars, he didn't get into some dumb controversy with anybody, he stayed consistent, he stayed competitive. My opinions on Haley, by the way, is I really enjoy watching him race, and mainly for the last few years that he's started to kind of mature as a driver overall and become more competitive, more consistent. He fits in perfectly to what Colleague Racing wants to do as a race team, and seeing that team stay behind him and developing him into a more and more capable driver has been great to see as well. Next up, the 24 at Hendrick Motorsports, William Byron. That team, really strong at the beginning of the season, had a god-awful summer, then picked it up again in the playoffs. After this being Byron's, believe it or not, 5th season already in the 24 car, I'd say that the team is right there when it comes to being competitive. My opinions on William Byron? Don't really have much of one, although I have to admit that his spinning of Denny Hamlin under caution at Texas was pretty surprising because I didn't think he would bring himself to do something like that. Next up, 23 car at 2311. If we just focus on the 23 car, the number 23 that accumulated the owner's points, that car struggled a lot more than the 45 because both Kurt Busch and Bubba Wallace scored a victory this year, but it was both behind the wheel of the 45. Now, I understand that if you look at the beginning of the season, the whole team was different from the end of the season, okay? So it's kind of hard to compare beginning to end performance for 2311, and that's speaking for both cars. But the 23, if we're talking about it from a number perspective, that particular number had a worse go at it than the 45. But I will use this opportunity, since he'll be back in the car next year, the number 23. I will use this opportunity for the opinion piece to talk about Bubba Wallace. And I do have to say that he was trending pretty far up on favorite driver list until the Las Vegas incident, when that kind of wiped all that away, because I've seen this issue with a lot of drivers over the years. A lot of very competitive young drivers where they let the emotions consume them. 23 team and Bubba Wallace has a good future ahead of it, as long as they kind of just reel themselves in and don't beat themselves like what we saw at Vegas. 22 team, Joey Logano. What more do I have to say about this race team other than the fact that they've just won their second championship? That, I'm pretty sure, defines the whole thing. Joey Logano, I would say, is one of the few drivers that perfectly fits the playoff model. Well, you know that I'm not a very big fan of this format because it goes against the whole concept of points being a reward for performance. So shouldn't the guy who earns the most points be the champion? I mean, you know. But anyway, Logano really rises to the occasion when he's in those high-pressure scenarios. My opinions on Logano? I'll be honest, he's a fun driver to watch, and as he matures, I mean, he has become an incredible driver. And I think one of the reasons why it's fun to watch him is because you know when he wins, Twitter's going to have a meltdown afterwards. All right, next up is the 21 of Harrison Burton. I don't exactly know what to make of this race team because they've obviously fallen off from their height that they had with Ryan Blaney about 5 years ago. But overall, I'd say they did about as good as you'd expect from, a rookie driver at Wood Brothers, 27th in points. Not very good. Not very bad, right within expectation. We saw a couple bright spots, like, a top 10 finish at Atlanta, and also that third place finish at the Indy Road Course. My opinions on Harrison Burton? I don't know, he's one of the few drivers I have on this wall that's currently active. There's him painting Juan Montoya in 2010. Next up, number 20 team of Christopher Bell. I have to admit, they did a lot better than I thought they were going to do this year, mainly because they kept scoring clutch victories during the playoffs, which advanced them forward in the rounds and made their points position look better, because they were 6th best when it comes to points scored, but ended up actually 3rd in the championship because of the playoff format. Nonetheless, Christopher Bell has shown some great career progression. For this year, though, I'd say the 20 car took over the spot that the 18 car used to have as being a super competitive Gibbs entry. My thoughts on Christopher Bell? About equal as William Byron. I got great respect for their ability as a driver, and that's it. All right, next up is the number 19 of Martin Truex Jr. Now, this team had a really weird season overall. A lot of instances of bad luck that kept them out of getting to victory lane, mainly. But let's just focus in on the fact that they did not have a bad season. The playoffs would like for you to think they had a bad season because they didn't have a chance at the championship and ended up 17th. But they were 7th best when it comes to points scored. They scored more points than William Byron, more points than Denny Hamlin, more points than Kevin Harvick, Chase Briscoe, Daniel Suarez, Tyler Reddick. I can go on. The 19 team had a good season. They just didn't win, and that doesn't work well for this format. When it comes to my overall opinions on Martin Truex Jr., I have an interesting history of liking him at different points of his career and hating him at others. DEI, that phase of his career, I didn't really give a crap about him. MWR, I enjoyed that race team, so it was, when Truex joined, it's like, okay, I gotta learn to like this guy. And then Spingate happened. Then when he went to Furniture Row, felt bad for him because I figured, the whole Spingate thing, that just ruined his career outright. But then they started to build such a good program, they eventually won a championship. But I have to say that for a span of Truex's career, probably from 2016 until last year, I personally really couldn't stand him. This year, though, I felt bad for him enough to where I'm starting to actually like him again. NASCAR, the number 18, Kyle Busch. The whole Joe Gibbs and M&M's Kyle Busch partnership, it didn't have a good season go out on, and honestly, that's pretty unfortunate that it didn't. Even knowing that a lot of drivers and teams would kill for Kyle Busch's 2022 season, they got that win at the Bristol Dirt Race, and they were still overall pretty competitive. It just wasn't a Kyle Busch season. And now my opinions on Kyle Busch. About 10 or so years ago, more like 11, especially after the Hornaday incident, could not stand Kyle Busch. But over the years, very recently, like within the last 5 years, he's matured tremendously. A lot like what his brother did. Kyle Busch is almost a completely different driver and person from what he was 6-7 years ago. And he's way up there on the favorite driver list if he keeps trending in this right direction. Next up, number 17, Chris or Christopher Buescher. But this 17 team has stepped it way up in performance. If you look at what they've accomplished this season, they haven't really been consistent at all, and that's what cost them in the long run. They had the pace to both almost win Sonoma almost win Richmond in the fall, but then actually won Bristol with a great strategy call because tires didn't matter at all in that race. Point being, this race team has stepped up the performance enough to be able to pull off strategy calls to win races. Roush Fenway didn't have that ability the last couple years. My opinions on Chris Buescher, always liked him as a driver. Almost always been underrated, but he always kind of brings something extra out of his equipment. I mean, now at RFK, he's driving a car that probably has top 15 pace, but is capable of getting near wins and then a win from strategy at Bristol. I've always enjoyed his ability to bring more out of a piece of equipment than it logically should be able to do. Next up, 16 car at Colleague Racing. The 3 drivers that were fielded in the 16 car this year: AJ Almendinger, Noah Gragson, Daniel Hemrick. It definitely was a strong lineup for an all-star entry. I mean, overall, the 16 car was, kind of carried by AJ Allmendinger, which we all pretty much expected. Daniel Hemrick did pretty decent in it. Noah Gragson did about as good as you'd expect out of a driver making his first Cup starts. AJ Allmendinger went on a tear of 6 consecutive top 10 finishes among his respective starts. So him being full-time in that car in the Cup Series next year, especially with his 3rd place finish at Homestead, I'm just saying, I think the Cup field should be pretty nervous about that. My opinions on those drivers, those 3 drivers that they fielded, I definitely enjoy AJ Allmendinger because he brings a lot of energy to any series that he's in, especially now that he's competitive. Daniel Hemrick I root for simply because of all those years of him getting second all the time, and then finally, first career wins him a championship. Noah Gragson, personality-wise, still really can't stand him, but I will not deny him of his ability and competitiveness, especially for the latter half of the Xfinity Series season this year. Next up, the 15 car at Rick Ware Racing. Yet another all-star car. And I'll be honest, I don't have much of an opinion on this whole car. It's once again, just like the 78 and 77 and those types of entries, a car that's kind of just there because it has a charter. They fielded drivers this year such as J.J. Yaley, Parker Kligerman, Garrett Smithley, David Reagan, probably some others that I'm forgetting. Either way, they put together a hodgepodge schedule. Opinions on the drivers, because they ran so many, I'm going to narrow it down to just a few. I mean, you got to like J.J. Yaley, he's J.J. Yaley. Garrett Smithley, don't have many opinions about one way or the other. Next up, 14-car Chase Brisco. They definitely exceeded my expectations going off of how their 2021 season went. Overall, Chase Brisco showing up to be the future of Stewart-Haas Racing and has a pretty bright future ahead of him if it continues at this rate. I don't have too strong of an opinion about him either way, but farther towards the like side of the list. Next up, number 12, Ryan Blaney. That team might not have won a points-paying race this year, but listen, they scored more points than Joey Logano. They were actually only 61 points off of Chase Elliott when it comes to most points scored. That is honestly incredible for a winless race team. I mean, imagine if they could have cleaned it up and got some victories, just how competitive they would have been overall. Opinions on Ryan Blaney? Let me put it this way. Just like Dave, he shows up to the track, does his job, does it quite well, and that's about it. And now, Dennis Hamlin. Very interesting driver to talk about. Hamlin overall had a pretty solid season. Scored 2 victories at Richmond and also the Coke 600 at Charlotte. I just think it's really ironic that, every time him and Chastain ran into each other, Hamlin lost out. Gateway, Chastain wrecks Hamlin, finishes ahead of him. Atlanta, Chastain wrecks Hamlin. Chastain finishes ahead of him. Pocono, Hamlin wrecks Chastain, wins the race, but then doesn't. Chastain finishes ahead of him. And then finally, it all culminated at Martinsville with Chastain knocking him out of a chance at the championship. Now, even knowing that Chastain did not win the championship, let's just be honest. When it comes to those two's rivalry, there's one really critical thing that Chastain did. It was remove Hamlin's chance of winning a title. Because let's face it, how many more opportunities does Hamlin have at legitimately winning a championship? He probably has 2 competitive seasons left, I mean, if we're being totally honest. Meanwhile, Ross Chastain probably has closer to 13 competitive seasons left, so I'm just saying it means more to Hamlin to not have a chance at the championship right now in his career than it does to Chastain to miss out by just a few positions. Anyways, my opinions on Denny Hamlin. I find him personally annoying, I can say that, but 9 times out of 10, the crap that comes out of his mouth, I have to agree with. Next up, number 10, Eric Almirola. Overall, the 10 team didn't have a very great season. They finished 20th in the point standings, which is the lowest ever since Almirola went to drive the 10 car. It's kind of hard to get a read on this number 10 team. I mean, they can bust a win off at any point, but it is going to take some work to get back to the height that they had in their first year together in 2018 when he finished 5th in points. My opinions of Eric Almirola: I honestly enjoy that driver. I mean, again, I always kind of have a soft spot for drivers that have to rough it out for a long portion of their career. He's a hard driver not to root for, is what I'm getting at. Next up is the number 9 car of Chase Elliott. Now, this team definitely scored the most points of any individual car. The only thing is that they gave up a lot of points in the latter half of the season. I forget what the exact number was, but in the last 10 races, they lost something like 70 points to the competition. So they really did coast off of what they accomplished in the first 26 races to get all the way to Phoenix. I do have to admit, though, watching Chase wreck himself over the front end of the one car was hilarious in that championship race. I mean, it was a perfect Carl Edwards maneuver. It's the same thing Carl did to Brad Keselowski in the Aaron's 499. It's the same thing he did to Logano in the championship race in 2016. People keep trying to copy Carl Edwards' moves. Riding the wall, wrecking yourself over the front end of another car. I mean, everybody's trying it out. Anyways, overall, it was a great season for the 9 team. The amount of points they scored is very indicative of how often that car was up front. I mean, it just so happens that under the format that we have, it's not about being the best. It's about being the best when you have to be the best. And when that time came, the 9 car was not in. My overall opinions of Chase Elliott, I'll be totally honest, he ranks up there with Byron, as I really don't care that much. Next up, 8 car of Tyler Reddick. I think we all share the same surprise by the fact that this team stayed competitive even after Tyler Reddick's announcement he was going to 2311. I don't think anyone expected this team to be able to win races after that, let alone win 2 of them. But yeah, this team way exceeded expectations in my opinion. I mean, I knew Reddick was probably going to get a win this season. I did not expect him to get 3 of them. At least, the partnership between Reddick and Childress ended on a very competitive note, unlike, Kyle Busch and Joe Gibbs Racing. Reddick's got a pretty bright future ahead of him, going to a very now competitive 2311. Overall opinions on Tyler Reddick, I enjoy his presence in the Cup Series field. He adds, a lot of ability to it, but he's yet another driver that really I can't side on an opinion one way or the other. Next up, number 7, Corey LaJoie. That 7 car was definitely the top achieving car at Spire. Him almost winning Atlanta, I think, surprised every single one of us. The 7 team really is trending in the right direction. Overall opinions on Corey LaJoie, he ranks right up on the somewhat enjoy part of the scale, mainly because I don't really care too much, but when I do care, it's at least somewhat positive. Next up, number 6, Brad Keselowski. Even though he's pretty much had the worst season of his full-time Cup Series career, I would say that honestly it went about as well as you'd have to expect. Driver-owner has never been an easy task. Really, his best shot of winning this whole season were the Superspeedway races, which he always kind of figured out a way to screw that up, then Bristol, which he had a great shot at winning until that flat tire late. At least his teammate won that one, so it did prove that RFK can win. We've just yet to see if the driver-owner can win outside of the duels. Opinions on Brad Keselowski? Now, this is probably not a very frequent one, but I actually really do enjoy Brad Keselowski as a driver. And if you want to know what the origin of that is, James Finch. Brad Keselowski was the only driver to ever score Phoenix Racing a NASCAR Cup Series victory. Next up, number 5, Kyle Larson. The 5 team had a great season, one that most teams would kill for, but coming off of the absolute high that they had in 2021, the 2022 season became disappointing in comparison. Overall opinions on Kyle Larson directly mirror Christopher Bell. Respect their incredible driving talent. That's it. Next up, number 4, Kevin Harvick. This year was a huge improvement over what they had last year. For the simple fact that they scored 2 victories is just proof that that whole group, Harvick and Rodney Childers, have still got it. Overall opinions of Kevin Harvick, I've had my points where I absolutely couldn't stand him. Once he started to build KHI into a very, very major force in the truck series and also a competitive Busch team, a lot of those thoughts of not being able to stand him kind of went away because I saw the impact he was having on the sport in general and especially like Hornaday's career. His tenure at KHI is one of the deciding reasons why he's in the Hall of Fame. So the impact that Harvick has had has been absolutely major. Once you gain a respect for that, and also he mellowed out a lot over the years, I just have such a respect for him at this point that you almost have to like him in that regard. Next up, number 3, Austin Dillon. I'm telling you, this team had a lot of opportunities to win races kind of fall through the cracks, the biggest one being the Coke 600. Even though they didn't have a very outstanding season, they still put together a pretty solid one for their standards. They actually finished 11th in the point standings. Obviously, that Daytona win was under some strange circumstances, but at least they did capitalize. Anyways, my opinions on Austin Dillon. He is in the somewhat like range. I mean, you know, he's a good person, pretty solid driver, and pretty much gets the job done when he needs to. Next up, number 2 of Austin Cindric, the Daytona 500 champion and Rookie of the Year award winner. Austin did have a very solid rookie season. I mean, he finished 12th in points, about as much as you'd want out of a rookie driver. Opinions on Austin Cindric, good enough driver. That's about it. And finally, the number 1 car of Ross Chastain. Pulled off a lot of antics this year, especially that wall ride, which still doesn't look like it should have worked. But I'm telling you, that team way overachieved from expectations. Definitely didn't expect them to get 2 wins, score a crap ton of points, make it to the championship 4, and end up 2nd in points. Overall opinions on Ross Chastain right now, because of the insane Martinsville maneuver, he's trending up on the like scale. There were portions of the year where, I'll be honest, I really just couldn't stand him just because of how much stuff he was tearing up. But I do have tremendous respect for the path that he has taken to getting up to Cup, grinding it out over, you know, a decade or so in NASCAR's national divisions to get to this point. He has definitely earned a seat. You know, I've realized that this accidentally became a psychoanalysis of myself in many ways. And that's because I've not only analyzed the Cup Series field, but I've also analyzed my own analysis. And actually, the fact that I don't have too many strong feelings against any particular driver is mainly because they are going about putting their lives essentially on the line for our entertainment as race fans. So they're doing us a service, so there's really no reason to dislike a driver. I mean, we're all human, so I'd say a good 90% of their negative actions can be justified just by mere observation. And I'll be honest, I've never really been one to give a crap about driver drama. I mean, if I did, I probably would have watched Race for the Championship for more than like 5 minutes. I am a fan of racing, so I care about cars on track and their performance, not too much else. That's why I'm more concerned about the numerous issues that we have right now with the next-gen car that need to be addressed quickly. Even if they do get all the safety stuff right, they then need to focus on the fact that the racing product has taken a huge hit at almost every track. Anyways, hopefully you've enjoyed this analysis/opinion piece. I wanted to lump multiple things in at once to kind of get more covered. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next video that I've got planned, which is actually some more NASCAR Thunder stuff. Since I saw a lot of folks really enjoying that first video that I posted, some follow-up videos are set to come out fairly soon.